It's properly fascinating to compare piano teaching interpretation with stage theater interpretation. The teacher or the director, stage director, sometimes goes to the point of spoon feeding the character's details psychologically, emotionally, the delivery of the speech, the eloquence, the quality of emotion between overplay, underplay, right play. And the fact that when a piano student comes to play a storytelling, a ballade by Chopin or any piece really, even if it doesn't have a program in it, becomes somehow captivating because of the way it's literally told in music. And of course the margin is lesser because you have more of the indications for pitch and rhythm rather than spacing of the words. And then they have to be either the actor, the comedian, or the director, a stage director who decides how to do that. And the teaching between the two is very interesting because it's, in a way, pushing to the envelope to its extreme about what is the character that is displayed, how it interacts with the harmonic, melodic, polyphonic, whichever texture. It's a monologue in dialogue between elements on the piano, even solo, not only chamber music or with lyrics if you accompany voice. But even so, the text is famous to many, if it is, but then it's very personal the way it's going to be delivered. And observing theater, stage theater teachers speaking about the character is really the horse, and you're the horseman riding the character through the play, or the opposite. You are the character, and the horse allows you to go through the vehicle. In a way, it could be the pulse and the rhythm in music as the propulsion, and then the harmonies and the melodic lines as the substance of the text. Another analogy is the spontaneity and the calculated effects and ornaments, decorations, which are unmeasured in the score, compared to innuendos in the theater plays, lines, text that you have to say. In both cases, you have to memorize in order to bring it to the point where it becomes your own statement. During the ephemeral moment of the presentation, you have to defeat the skepticism of the audience that you're playing, pretending. Perhaps that healthy distance between an agreed trumpery. We think that, in fact, it's a rupture of disbelief that happens at one moment where you immerse yourself in the character. You become the piece. You become the character in the play, the hero or wounded hero, and then all the nuances about expressing anger with reserve or with cynicism or with vulnerability. And all these nuances are also in music, in modulations, in harmonic modulations, but also in the interpretations, how to dosage the effects of the sounds, but also the purpose of the statement of the phrase. In fact, it's fascinating that we have so much leverage, more than we claim, I guess. On the other hand, everybody is mostly worried about not making a mistake in the first place. Wouldn't it be nice if there were microphones that recorded pianists with some artificial intelligence device and automatically cleared up all the wrong notes? It will at least free the students from that fear of, oh my God, have to play it reliable and secure and clean obstacles course. And then it would allow them to free themselves from this, in fact, fear, and let them just express their musicianship, just like a conductor does without the fear of a wrong note, because they cannot make one, but those who play can. And it's a question of placing the musicians through the way you conduct, you anticipate, you prepare the beats, the breathing for the wind players' entrance and all. Place them in the best position for them to blossom the sound at its best as you wish it, for the dynamics and whatever is even written in the score. In a way, the orchestration already talks about it by the timbres of the instruments, the piano being perhaps some kind of a shadow and lights, black and white photography, hinting and suggesting the elements and therefore the balance of the effects. It's in your hands, literally. Of course, the acoustics of the hall, well, architecture was built before you enter in the hall. Though you have the pedaling for the resonances and then the clarity for the texture with the fingers. So you have rooms to improve the clarity if you think that is too blurry in a given acoustic. But ultimately, even if there are no words to be said, in a specific text to be let's say, broadcasted literally from the breath of the actor to the audience, in this intimacy of exchanging about the philosophic aspect of the character in the play and the play in its own time period and therefore civilization and so forth. It's an escapism in both cases. And all these parallels bring me to think that piano students would benefit a lot from observing stage theater teachers, provoking, directing, pushing the envelope in each retake of this, let's say, scene with a replica by another student, without outfits and without costumes and without all, just the words, the power of the persuasion that comes through the choice of the words placed in a certain way, in the breath, in the delay, in the rhetoric, the quality of the enunciation, and then the natural way of delivering it without to appear pompous. There are ways to put words in your mouth, just like you put a legato with overstated, or just air legato, or portato. In the way you hint a lot through the articulation about what are the innuendos in the middle of a sentence that in fact is heroic but innerly wounded, or perhaps this kind of subtle innuendos that come from an actor's gaze compared to what they say, and perhaps even the expression of their inner world that comes through perhaps too much and then has to be tamed, or it's like the rubato is unwritten, but if you don't do, it's rigid, and if you do too much, it's distracting from the purpose of the statement. Let less the atmosphere, the frivolity, or the depth of the reflection, whatever it is. The more I teach piano, therefore music, therefore form, therefore contents, therefore harmonic progressions, modal progressions, or any other type of bitonal, microtonal, or posttonal, or atonal, is a vehicle again for a statement of a human experience or a spiritual experience that is translated through the through the presence of the elements that you try to secure. In the concert halls, people feel like they deliver. In the music schools, it's like a laboratory. They search how to deliver. And in the Mozarteum in Salzburg, they often speak about sicher oder musikalisch, in German, meaning play secure or musical, as if it's not and, but or. The one being musical would induce some messiness, or like the French expression goes, you don't make an omelette without to break eggs. And if you're fearing this wrong note that for now there is no yet, but surely it will come one day in technology, real-time artificial intelligence software that will clear you up from the fear of the wrong note, perhaps from the wrong intonation on a string instrument or voice. So you can free all your being artistically to focus on the character you're going to become, or the vehicle of which you become. Perhaps both, at different levels, in different intensities. I like to believe that the interpretation belongs like a glove to a performer, let less to the composer of the piece. But then again, it's in the eye of the beholder, those who come at a different season after the composition of the piece, and they rediscover it, perhaps recompose it in their interpretation by appropriation. The jazz musicians do that. They do always variations on the same tunes, but with their own personal, not only touch, but also delivery and their own psyche, basically. With classical music notation and editions so well supervised by so many scholars for authenticity, it seems international competitions that all performers have to be alike in order to be reliable, again. Perhaps not that musical in the sense of creative, or perhaps to a certain extent that creativity would be considered eccentric. Since you compare comparables, you have to be alike. And then once you win, if you do, the competition by perhaps reaching a common denominator among different opinions of juries about the way to play the very piece itself, then you have to captivate the attention of the audience in a recital where they expect you to tell them the story as perhaps they like to hear it, or they have a favorite already, but then they come to hear it how you would say it. So it's a communion between people who know about the piece and who enjoy it, compared to those who would come and just want to discover it, which is also very, very inspirational for the artist to have this responsibility to be readable in their interpretation, to be meaningful in their innuendos, to be elegant in the delivery, not overweight, not underweight, not overstate, not understate, just the right tone, the right touch, the right energy, the right element of freedom, perhaps rubato, where you give and take, since means stealing or stolen time, and virtuously returning it or not, or where, in the end of the bar or after a 4-bar sequence. It has to sound intuitive or spontaneous, even if it's doctored or perhaps planned. And if it's too obvious that it's planned, then it's like no rupture of disbelief. You don't believe the character becoming, in the playing of the comedian, yet blending in, becoming it. And it's an ephemeral moment where you want to believe in it, because you embody the storytelling, just like you embody the ballade by Chopin, even if everybody has their own idea of how it's supposed to be when they read it on their own, like you do a novel or a poem. You don't need somebody to tell you how to read it or how to tell it to yourself. It's an intimate interaction between the piece and you, the text and you. and all what it vehicles, if it's a translation and how, if it's the original text and you can read it in the language where you understand the innuendos that you cannot always do in a translation, even if the translation can be very subtle. Because you don't translate meanings, you translate sub-meanings, you translate hints, you translate a philosophy of the character rather than only what the character in action or perhaps in contemplation is represented and represents. That's why when people prefer the book, they are unsatisfied by the way it was either staged, filmed, if it's a film, or played by the comedians, the actors, the tragic comedians, or the just comic comedians. Now, there's so many levels of secondary distance with the text as well as involvement in the text. And the beauty of it is that in stage theater, like in music, it's one time through. And every time unexpected, and you deal with the unexpected. You prepare for it by rehearsing repetitively, but then you have to deal with the unexpected. And that's the beauty of the moment that is shared with an audience that is one of a time, one of a kind at a time. Very often, students think that because they practice repetitively, they will just play one more time through on stage like they practiced at its best. But the hearing of the music awareness is higher when people keep holding their breath to listen to you, and you hear more of the piece than you ever heard of it, and it almost surprises you because it reveals itself to you like in like a prism from a different light, and you almost get lost in the piece, not because you don't know it from memory, but because the path that you usually follow with your hearing, all of a sudden you hear it from another perspective of the piece that you play yourself, just because it's on stage with a different acoustic from practice room and etc. But it's the awareness of it as well. Because repetitively you dislocate, separate, disconnect the purpose attention with the mechanical reproduction of the technical aspect of how to handle this section, prepare this and that position of the body in order to extract the sound at its best, if it's staccato fast, if it's legato slow, and if it's over legato or just spoken legato, etc. Certain things like this can be memorized, like the text for actors, and then of course their stage acting according to the stage director or their own suggestion if they're allowed. Same with students, they're often spoon-fed all the notes and the expression and how to deliver it, because in a way they admire the person who spoon-feeds them. But on the other hand, I think it's not respectful. Of course, it depends with whom you work. If they have already come to the lesson for a given piece that they play, is that you don't have to convince them about all this philosophy of the piece. Even if it's not the one that perhaps they share with you, they have their point of view or their entrance point in the piece, even if it's younger than yours after decades of living with it. You have to be humble to accept the alterity and their entrance into the piece from another point of view that enriches you, even if you can say, no, I don't believe it's supposed to be like this because of this style, this tradition, this way, this, that, or just simply because of the voicing and sculpting of the chords or the elements, so you can highlight this and heavy, less heavy, but still projecting. And it's all kinds of, at all kinds of levels you can deliver the piece almost tailor-made for the moment where you do. In a way, you dialogue already with the piano who tells you what it can do or not. And if you get stiff or, let's say, muscularly nervous just because you feel perhaps uncomfortable on stage, then you don't deliver with the same precision of the shiftings that you have to anticipate, touch, play, and then it's looks physically unnatural, but then from close-up you can always have even a nanosecond before to deliver the note, the time to shape it, rather than just land on it and hope is the right note. Which anyway, the cognitive repetitivity helps you to put in them cognitive memory. I mean, tennis players do that, and they don't put the ball out of the court after they practice endless hours responding to different weights of ball they receive and speeds and angles and effects on it and all. But they're not told to play the same subtle, good game of detailed, millimetric almost precision in the response to a serve by another player across, who sends them a bullet, and they have to be able to return it with finesse so that it lands just in a place where the effect will make it go in the net. And this, in fact, is always tributary to the terrain, if it's clay or if it's grass, and how the ball rebounds and how much the tension of your racket is, of the strings. And if it's standardized with the sizes of the courts and the texture of the floors of the courts and the rackets, you end up by being able to deliver a certain high caliber precision playing that is delightful for the audience, rather than just direct mistakes where you put the ball out of the court. But unlike the pianists, who have to, they deliver the same subtleties, or expected to deliver the same cascade of subtleties that are planned, organized, prepared, dosaged in the touch, in the weight, in everything, while the pianos don't respond by the action or the sound or the resonance at all alike in each other. So in fact, it's like saying to a tennis player, well, tomorrow you'll play the same refined game, but the court will be circularly rounded, or perhaps triangular rather than rectangular, let less their very size. They'll say it's impossible. Same thing for a violinist. You would give them in their hand a Strad and say, without preparation, just play directly. They can't. Even if it's the greatest violin, they have to find a way to be like the horse and the horseman, with the analogy about the text to be delivered in a screenplay, with the actor becoming the character and the text being the vehicle, therefore perhaps the horse of the horseman. All these analogies bring us to say that the piano and the pianist become in one unit to extract sounds rather than drop them by the fingers. When necessary, yes, but not all the time because of the variety of touches. Same thing with whisper to scream, or how to whisper the text, and where to be believable in your emotion and not to be just faked, even if in a certain way it is. So you teach yourself as an actor to cry when you need, and how. Perhaps that's how we also doctor our playing, about the rubato and this and that. And you would say, you play it once through, then yes, all the emotional landscape of the delivery happens as it's planned by the author. But when you practice it section by section, or I guess scene by scene in the theater play, you deliver it, but it's not connected to the flow of the storytelling, in which it takes its place in a specific way. So you learn it, then you deliver it, then you study how you delivered it, and then you try to think, but perhaps I shouldn't take it that fast, or this articulation brings this emotion, or the tempo is not in the speed, it's in the articulation, in the delay, in the spacing, the air between the notes. Even if they're all written very precisely on the score, you can still have some room to enhance through a trill, perhaps, that demands more notes in little time. Then you have to take a nano-fermatina time to enhance that breath between the beats. And yeah, in that sense, it becomes almost spoon-feeding too. Well, it depends what we consider spoon-feeding. In a way, yes, the macro and the micro, we have to be over-detailed in order to be reliable for which fingering brings the best delivery of this voicing or this shifting or that stretch. And each hand being different and the keys being the same size, we have to find for each student the ideal ergonomy of the fingering, how to handle the section rather than just play it while playing it. It's not about pleasurable, but it's also about being able to convey a certain element of the musical intent through a delivery of a phrasing, through a certain fingering that then will connect notes or leaps of intervals or some kind of gestural expression that might become too important for what it is if it's not delivered with a certain nonchalant, almost apparently detached from the precision details, is because a lot is done in the repetitivity of the practicing. But the delivery sometimes, as I say often, it's true to all of us, betrays us. We plan, and then once we have to deliver the moment where we have to, the plan almost vanishes, and we deal with the way things happen like in life. This you plan your day, but it comes to become, because of other circumstances, the way it went. And you plan meeting somebody whom you admire, and then you're perhaps even more admirative or even disappointed. You cannot know in advance how the piece will betray you, or you betray the piece, the text, the delivery, or disagree with the stage director or, on the stage telling you to deliver this from this point of the stage in this, with this tone and with this way. I don't think there is much room to discuss about it, because you choose at the beginning that you'll be in a way a puppet in a puppeteer's hands. Not the text, but, well, the bringing it alive. And same thing can be told about some music, piano teaching. It could be also considered puppet and puppeteer, but I think those terms are derogatory because in a way they're meant to be. But there is some truth to the fact that when you observe somebody play that who's not teaching you, you learn a lot by just observing. How much of it you can individually absorb from it and appropriate into your own hands is different from a teacher who tries attentively to tailor the fingering to your hands' specificity. So in arpeggio, take it in this hand, compared to the addition, find a way to distribute it differently so that you can reach this or that goal of phrasing or direction of line or ritenuto or crescendo. Not only because they're notated, but also because they have to become meaningful in the way you develop your statement. And if sometimes, but that is difficult to teach because it would be pedagogically unfit to do, is to teach a student to be not respectful of some indications in order to bring the given sentence to another point of delivery than the one that is codified in the score. And besides that, it's not really codified because there's so much ways to make literally a translation. The word interpretation is what it is. As if from a text, also from the music text, which is its own language, doesn't need words to be explained. But when you teach, you explain, and then you try to adjust some of the details in order for the delivery to be not only more reliable, but also more meaningful, and try to convince the student that this meaning, this level of meaning or this amount of meaning is what is necessary there. It's not just because you're in an asymmetrical situation that you feel like the student has to accept all of your ways of doing, because ultimately it's what you would do when you play. When I play, I take some freedoms because I'm convinced of them. Perhaps I forged them through intuition and decades of experience, and for good or bad. And people disagree, or reviewers write bad things and or misunderstand the intent that I had. Fine, but I don't play that with students' future, because they have first to establish their reputation before they establish their freedom of thinking of the text. But within even that, there is room for triggering in educated freedom. Not against the text, but giving the student also the room to, in the early stages of their knowledge of the piece compared to a teacher's knowledge of the piece, to bring their own selves within it, and not be denied by essence just because they're novice. Sometimes they don't need to be that more only filled with knowledge and then experience in order to be delivering something believable or convincing. Of course, the technique specifically, well, which would make them reliable on the delivery, then frees them to be able to be more creative in the delivery itself. So there is no great art without technique. But technique by itself is not the end, is the vehicle. And if you don't know what you want to say as a composer in a statement musically that you write, or in an interpretational statement of a music already written, which becomes yours during the moment you play it, and this sharing with the audience is like the text, even if the audience knows the text of the delivery by the theater actor. They can disagree and say, I wish he took more time, or I wish he this or that, or she this or that. And it's easy to be, it's like watching sports on TV, right? It's easy to, or me teaching, sitting next to the pilot seat of the student in front of the piano. I'm next. And so I advise, I echo what they just made and tell them you'll do it better through this way or this other way. Try that, see if it works for you. But no matter how much I put it in words, it's lame compared to all what you have to say through the very notes of the music of the composer. It's almost like all your life within that note, or all your experience of life within that phrase, or all your experience of what tragic or comic or tragicomic is through this piece, or perhaps with irony in a given composer style and with more genuine, honest tragedy in the other. And the amount of the combinations, it's just such a subtle chemistry. And it doesn't come out every time the same way, either because of the instrument or because of yourself. I remember how often when I record, I want to do often no recording edits, so I like to take full takes. But the problem is often that the day to the next, even if the piano is the same, the microphone is in the same position, I listen to the takes and I go, my God, this sounds like another pianist. And it's sometimes because it's the morning or it's the afternoon, because the microphones are today able to capture so much of the slightest touch control, tiniest shades of subtlety, that you surprise yourself for not sounding like not only you expect, but let's say compared to the day before. So because of that, the delivery is never the same, even if we work towards being reliable with repetitivity. And I think that in what fascinates me in theater teaching is that they go way more in details about the delivery versus the text itself. The breathing, of course, and how many words you'll say in a given monologue in one breath. So it's like, is it mezzo piano? Is it mezzo pianissimo? Is it mezzo pianississimo? Can we be nuanced under a certain dynamic range? Can we not bang above a certain fortissimo or fortississimo? Is a mezzo fortissimo dynamic range, always leaving a little extra? Because at some point you have to be able to not saturate the sound with your impactful playing, but also deliver and listen to the acoustics in which you deliver and let the sound travel and shape, almost like when you, another analogy is sending the ball in bowling alley and hoping that it will take the curve that it takes until it hits. And so in a way you project the sound and you let it resonate until it reaches a point where you pick it from there to the next phrase, especially when you have to deal with decay. If you take too much in account the decay, then the post-decay note is obviously almost a whisper, depending how long and resonant you need in the tempo to hold the first, and then. But if you play it there and then all of a sudden also you just deliver it at impact as you did the first time, then you don't take into account the decay, and you hear in fact something detached, because you hear the consonants ta 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 rather than the legato, where you play under the escapement inside the keys before they lift it fully. Then you have a crescendo. And you want to blossom a note, and then. Now I'm just doing sounds, but what if you have to do it with other sounds, plus pulse, rhythm, phrasing, articulation, modulation, interaction with the other instruments, other parts of the same instrument. In that sense, I think that the living art form will remain always the most moving one. Even if it's full of inevitable defects into it, you don't edit live performance. You don't edit live. You prepare towards it, you organize towards it, you imagine towards it, you have all this technique to learn how to do the best trajectory, like a sports person running on a circle of a stadium and know exactly where the steps will land for getting the right speed, but also the sometimes you could say that the style influences the speed, if that is what determines, obviously, in sports, more than the style of how you reach it. In some sports you have this, like ice skating, figure ice skating, but nevertheless the delivery of the technique and the purpose of it, in this case running the fastest, is also something you plan ahead. But when you do it in real time, so many things come to play that could enhance it or impeach it to a certain extent. Wind, humidity, and the beauty of it is when you, like a ballerina or a ballet dancer, manage to conceal all the efforts that are almost inhumane in terms of physicality and the spirituality that comes out of a jump, of a leap, to erase the apparent effort in the classical ballet. It's to do with elegance, it's to do with magicians being on stage, it's to do with delivering the message beyond the messenger, or the messenger becoming the message. You don't want to see the effort or to notice the effort. Of course, you like to think it's effortless if it's well done, but that's a little bit superficial. Somehow there is the gesture and the meaning of the gesture and the means of producing this gesture. And philosophically, I think it's in the trip towards the aim that you satisfy a lot of your yearning and your search for what you are yearning for. Not only once you reach the certain goal that you set yourself. It's an incredible magnet towards which you go, and therefore it makes you improve. If the delivery is to erase the effort, it still has to be there to keep the substance of the essence. It's an enunciation of a vowel or enunciation of a consonant or enunciation in a different language that has different sounds from the throat or the resonators, like for singers in opera. It's always that, and the piano is an instrument that is the rare instrument where you don't touch directly the sound production. It goes through a complex action mechanically. The pianists are in denial often that they touch directly the vibrato of the sound, that the decay doesn't exist. I think to a certain extent it's of course self-persuasion, but it's necessary, because if you're constantly as a composer thinking, oh, I'm limited by my instrument, we don't think like that. In every time period people were modern. We think of them as in different time periods. And we think we're more modern because of this or that. But in every time period, they were modern, whatever that meant, for them. And I think that we are a little bit condescending sometimes when we see that we can accumulate so much documentation about science and art and human expression through sports or art. And we can say, yeah, you can hit the ball stronger or run faster. It's a beauty about music that the objective facts are not as essential. It's not because you play faster that you play better. It's not because you play slower that you play better. Perhaps in a certain tempo you hear more articulation innuendos than in a faster tempo. But of course in one you get to project some kind of vertigo, and in the other one you project a certain elegance of the details which gives you richness in the text. In a way, yes, if you take the boat or the airplane, you don't have the same journey, or you don't go through the time zones one by one through the boat ride to go to another continent. You don't experiment the smell of the sea and all. You just fly over. But of course, then you see the sky above the clouds, and you see the sunset and the sunrise. You have jet lag, and you feel like you went faster than the day or slower than the night. And I think the same thing about the tempi analogy. We tend to think, oh, it's supposed to be that fast, but what is a presto to one is perhaps allegro to another, regardless if it's clocked by a metronomic marking before it was marketed in the 1820s in Vienna or after. And even so, even when we have recordings of performers, composers themselves conducting their works or playing them, and we have the interpretations that differ. And I think that's honestly, that is what is the true humility and acceptance. That if it means something that you did to somebody else to do it, either to imitate what you did or play what you wrote, musically in this case, mine, I'm very touched by that, because I find that that's the level of tolerance. I don't own the interpretation of my piece just because I gave birth to it. Like you don't own your child's life to come because you gave life or you were there in the most important, let's say, early years of vulnerable growth and strong growth and all intellectual, physical, emotional, psychological, the awareness of the world, etc., and the time changing as well in the world. Everything is in constant movement. Nothing is, And then somebody else meets a significant other, your child, at a different time of their season of life, and they embrace them for who they are if they do. And of course you could say, but the parents know them best if it is. The composer doesn't know best the piece. He just knows, or he or she knows the what brought you to choose this and that element of pitch or intonation or rhythmic pattern or harmonic progression, and perhaps you can't even define it always why, and it doesn't have to be. At the end of it is just what comes from your inner world, outer world. And then it's notated, and then the notation itself should suffice to mean what it means to somebody else, if it's meaningful to them differently from to you. Especially I spend most of my life teaching how dead composers must have wanted this piece to be delivered. But then in fact, ultimately it doesn't really matter, because in a way it's in our hands, of course, to respect the piece, but to bring it alive with our meaning, perhaps different from theirs. Not only because of the instrument, the acoustic, the purpose of the way of disseminating music through recorded or live performances. All these things evolve, but remains always the way you touch the hearts of people or the intellects of people, or perhaps both, through an equation, through a poem, through a symphony, through a sonata, through gaze, through a delivery of a monologue in a theater play, or interacting in a dialogue in a way that brings the words to touch you, perhaps manipulatively, but nevertheless you're there because you want to be told that and or shown that. Sometimes it's more delivered in the gaze than in the words, or how much of it's where. And same thing can be said in music. Not all people who read are writers, and not all people who are musicians or composers, but nevertheless, in the moment where you connect through a way that you can touch the piece, the words, the notes, that that connection to it is not the piece itself, it's just the way to connect to it. What you do with what you receive from it is so personal, so individual. And I think that's probably what is most astonishing and moving, that no matter how famous a given piece can be and already been documented, so many recordings of it by different people who are in their own right and way so convincing and perhaps even influencers for the younger generation, there is this moment where you deliver it. Probably the stage fright, besides the fear of being exposed, so to say, intimately for your feelings and your thoughts, even if it's not your text in front of people, it's unnatural. But once you go from this artifice, art artifice, through this artifice, you touch directly the reflection of the listeners. It's almost like as if you say, I take you by the hand and we'll have a walk through this text. Whatever it evokes to you. I'll show you what it evokes to me, but don't feel like this is the one only way. Perhaps there aren't many ways, but there are several, or perhaps at least they're your way, your text. In the eye of the beholder, in the ear of the beholder, in the soul of the beholder. I mean, of course, culture is shaping your being. What you read, what you heard, what you watched, what you rejected, or what you understood later, or how, for fashionable ways or non-fashionable ways, you connect to something that is harder to connect to because perhaps there is a language barrier, or a dead language, or other language, and regardless, you feel like your life has been impacted, so you think the world differently, even if it's in small ways, by what you received from a piano performance, from a theater delivery, of a text, of a character, of an interaction. And of course, you can become more and more critical by watching other people deliver the same lines and start saying, oh, I prefer this and that. Fine. And that is beautiful. As long as I find it more healthy when there is no elimination after like a jury does in a competition. And it says, these go forward and these others go home because they're not worthy. Perhaps they were not clean playing enough, or they said musically things that are not the way we're expected to be, whatever the norm is defined by the publishers and the musicologists. But I think the world is consistently renewing itself. And the future is the construction of the past, and the present is the future of the past, literally. And the past as soon as it has been delivered. Therefore, there is a timelessness that is so beautiful about a given message that becomes so meaningful that it could become a guideline for your own life in situations of real life unrelated to the play or the piece or the song or the film that you watched or the theater play that you studied or watched or heard or lived or perhaps played as an amateur, if not professional actor. So you touch things that are closest to the making of it. Amateur pianists is not meaning lover. Amare means love in Italian. Then you can be professional and still love it. It's not a... Of course, the competitivity is very strong and people are very ambitious, and so therefore perhaps they don't take the time because it takes longer to blossom a certain inner world of a piece within your interpretation than only going through it and possibly well. But what is well? Effective, beyond, prettiful, meaningful, insightful, convincing, inspirational, driven, detailed or distant. All these parallels with theater, live theater, with live music. Even if captured in a recording, at least is the spur of the moment. And that spur of the moment is ephemeral, passing, possibly banal, or unexpectedly unforgettable. A gaze, a perfume, a statement, a quote, a thought, a light on a painting from a different point of view in a different time of the day, or perhaps miss the point even in front of an artwork. Not necessarily always a purpose to discover or to find. Perhaps reject, but not say other than I'll try again, perhaps later. It's difficult to accept, to be so tolerant. It's easier to construct rejection, to build your own values. But in part it's true too. It's not impossible. Perhaps certain things unveil themselves later in life if we have a chance to prepare for it, indirectly or directly. So you cannot say to an actor, a singer, a pianist, a sportsman, when to do the delivery, because in some cases the physicality is essential for a ballet dancer as well for a sportsman. In other case, the intellectuality is disconnected from the body, so you can deliver at any time. It depends what you deliver. The substance or the presentation as well as the substance, not just the substance. And I teach at all levels, everything at the same time, in order to create a yearning of the student towards this aesthetic or this element of beauty described in that way, and to see how it means to them. So to a certain extent it is directive, and it needs to be, perhaps more to younger than others, but not always. It depends. It's really case by case. Maturity comes at different ages for different art forms, and it cannot be compared in regular life's maturity, because it could be immature for certain things and for others mature. What is to be considered is to be earnest, not faking or playing or manipulating for the sake of it. The technique is not an end by itself. And sometimes the gauche delivery has its charm too, of course, not in competitions, alas. That's why one cannot encourage that. One can only focus, shape, sculpt the delivery.